There's hope for tomorrow. We must first embark on the darkest hour.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Darkest Hour. I'm your host, Amanda Jane. Oftentimes, we rationalize the things we cannot easily explain. We are satisfied with it, usually. We move on because we can give good enough reason for whatever it was that happened. Even more often, we do this by selling ourselves short, believing that we were just scaring ourselves. Or, if it's so hard to describe, was it even real? Well, tonight, we hear from individuals who just weren't satisfied by the usual rationalizations. Stories about trusting what you're seeing, regardless of how insane or fantastic it might seem. So, let's get started, shall we? I wouldn't classify this as a terrifying story. I would consider this more in the realm of unexplained, and at least for me and in my life, intriguing. To set the scene, I am 12 years old at the time. It's a family reunion, the month of December. It wasn't snowing where we were in California, but it was very cold. All my family were inside. They were going to start a fire, and then we'd begin our official family game night. I always loved coming out to my aunt and uncle's house because they were so much further away from the city than our home. We lived in LA. Their home was in Joshua Tree. Surrounding my family's house was only small trees, smooth, rocky hills, and the desert, essentially. There weren't any other houses immediately in view. There also just weren't many people out there. So I was still outside. I wasn't riding my four-wheeler around anymore, but I was sitting on top of it, just taking in the night before going in to join the rest of my family. Sitting there, I saw something moving in the distance. I couldn't really see it at all, but it did kind of look like someone, or something walking on two legs. At the time, I was sure that it was just the moonlight hitting whatever this was, but it was all white, and it cast a shadow. As far as I could tell, it had no arms, and it moved rather slowly. It moved almost as though it was in slow motion. I started to walk in the direction of the thing, and as the house moved out of my line of sight, and more of the horizon was in my view, I could see that there was another one, slightly smaller and trailing just a bit behind the other one. It was behind, but it was still moving slowly and calmly. As my eyes adjusted even more, it wasn't like it made more sense, but I was gaining more details about the thing I was seeing. The things. Very thin legs, resembling more like how a bird has tall, skinny legs, but they weren't bird legs. They were completely straight. The creature had no wings. It was like sticks covered in a sham, not a transparent one. As a 12-year-old, I genuinely thought maybe I was looking at two moving ghosts, but more like the Halloween version of a ghost than a ghostly person. Again, there were no arms. I guess Casper was my best reference at the time, Casper on stilts with no eyes. I think that it can be easier to draw sometimes than what I'm describing, and I've done that many times. It's not that the drawings are so much detailed, because describing or drawing, I still don't know what their faces looked like. Everything was just white. I watched them for a good while, and they just sort of glided. No bending of the knees. Just two of them, making their way over the rocky hills. It was only then that I considered running in to grab someone, once they were out of sight. Originally, I didn't want to miss anything, but in that moment, I realized that I'd likely lost any hope of somebody validating what I'd been watching. I couldn't see them any longer, so I went inside for the fire and games. Though I never saw them again, and I still haven't to this day, I did get a chance to ask my uncle about them that night. He told me that he didn't know what it was that I saw, what they were, but he was pretty sure that he'd seen them before too. He told me the first time was a few years ago, and he'd only caught a glimpse of them. But then, the second time, he'd gotten a decent look, and there were two, one bigger and one smaller, just as I had seen. He asked if I too felt like they were peaceful. And I thought about that for a moment, and I decided that I guess I did think that. I told him that I wasn't scared, that yes, I felt they were peaceful, especially when I saw that there were two of them, one smaller and one bigger. He told me that, yeah, he agreed, and that he decided a while ago that maybe they were part of this land and this place, either protecting or maybe just coexisting with us. Even now, I still think he's probably right. That place always did feel special, and it still does. We had to cancel this year's reunion, which sucks, but usually every year my uncle and I will stay outside a bit longer than everyone else, just to see if we can get a glimpse. It's been about 12 years since my first and only sighting, but I'm pretty confident these things are still out there. I think they were here before us, and for some reason, I just think that they'll be here after us too. Anyways, that's my story. Sorry I don't have more information on what exactly these are. So a little background. I work as a manager in a call center, more of an emergency care line. Think Life Alert. My team and myself work on the other end of that line, answering those calls and dispatching emergency services. Naturally, we are a 24-hour operation, and we have offices connected in almost every city in the U.S. When I had this experience, I'd been working there for close to 3 years, and I never had anything weird happen, nothing paranormal. Our calls were either the real deal or calls that were made by mistake, but they always involved real people, real death. Death sucks, but it was at least something you could explain or understand. These were older people. Older people tend to pass on. But I never expected to deal with anything paranormal or unexplained. I didn't believe in ghosts, and I'm not religious. I don't really know what I believe in now, actually. I just try to keep an open mind. I do know that even without seeing anything personally, this experience sent chills down my spine. At this time, we had a physical office which myself and the IT department utilized regularly. Most of my direct reports and operators worked remotely. It was Friday night, and I'd just gotten back from my break, so it must have been around 2 a.m. Since being in my manager role, it was rare that I would take a lot of calls directly from people that needed assistance. Instead, I usually got the escalated calls. The calls where somebody wanted to complain, and they felt they could only do that with a manager. Shortly after returning from break, I received a call from one of my operators. She explained that she had a call from a paramedic that we'd sent out for an alarm activation. They said they were at the property, but they had no response, and they needed a supervisor to call them back. When I asked the operator why they needed me specifically, she said that the paramedic wouldn't tell her. I found that pretty odd. Paramedics didn't often use their time to file complaints, but they were also pretty forthcoming with all the details one could need regarding a report. I took down the number and I called the paramedic right away. When he answered, I was surprised to hear that he sounded shaken up. Not crying or anything, but awkward, nervous, hesitant. This was already strange. Of the thousands of calls I had made or taken from paramedics, I found they were always very confident, especially given the circumstances in which they are normally called to the scene. The paramedic anxiously began by apologizing profusely for asking for me directly. His explanation was that he knew some people might get upset with this kind of stuff. Now, to me, that is code for they found the resident that had passed away, and they didn't want to upset the operator, so I got ready to take down the details of the deceased. He gave me the address of the emergency and confirmed what the call-out was for. I brought up the details on our system, but we didn't have anyone listed in that property, at least not any longer. The device was still there, but the tenant, they'd been deceased for 2 weeks. This didn't immediately raise red flags, as sometimes this would happen, and we just wouldn't be notified that there was a new tenant yet. So that's what I explained to the paramedic. But there was more. The paramedic advised calmly, but uncertainly, that he had attended and no one was in there. That there was no problem. He stopped for a moment and I thought, I sure hope there's more. Why couldn't he just tell the operator this information? Then he said that something strange happened inside the property. Something that he needed my help to explain, as he couldn't find a logical conclusion. He said that he arrived at the property at the same time as the property manager, who had also been called out just after the paramedics. The property manager advised the same thing that I did, that it was strange that they were called to the scene, as the previous and last resident had passed away over 2 weeks ago. The manager explained that the property had remained empty, and that nobody had been inside since. He assured the paramedic that the place was secure, but also agreed to take him inside, just in case somehow there was someone who needed help. As the manager unlocked the door and entered, the paramedic stood just outside the door and could confirm that there were no signs of anyone having been in there for a good while. There was only a couple of pieces of furniture, and they looked like they had been set against a wall as not to be used. It smelled musky and dry like a room that had been empty and closed up might. The paramedic could see the property manager walking from room to room. Then he just came back out of the main room, and he stopped just before the doorway, but was frozen still. The paramedic asked what was wrong, and when the man started to speak, he knew that it wasn't a health emergency, and then he just listened. The manager went on to explain that the last time he was in the property, the couch was in the middle of the lounge. The paramedic looked over at the only couch that he could see, which was sideways up against a wall. He wasn't sure what to say to the manager, but they both chalked it up to maybe the last residents next of kin had moved it when they were clearing things out, and he just hadn't seen it. The paramedic said that they really should check the whole house, and if there was nothing, he would need to be on his way. So the two of them ventured in. Our company usually sells our product to long-term care facilities and nursing homes, or caregivers. The setup is a bit more than just something that you wear around your neck or wrist. Instead, our system has pull cords that are installed. You may have seen these in hospitals, usually in the bathroom, next to a toilet or somewhere lower to the ground, and you were told to never pull it, unless it was an emergency. That's our system. We have those pull cords all along the homes, especially in places where access to care is especially out of reach or could be urgent. In addition to those pull cords, along several hallways you have a cord similar to those on a public bus, where instead of hanging vertically from the ceiling or wall, it hangs horizontally and low. As the paramedic continued to look in the rooms and areas opposite that the manager was, he was calling out that it was clear. And as he headed down the corridor to the kitchen, he froze. On the ceiling, there was one of the residents' pull cords, spinning parallel and rapidly. Then, as he just watched and waited in awe, the cord began to slow down slightly, moving away from the ceiling. The paramedic took a step into the kitchen, thinking someone may actually be here and need help. Maybe it was connected somewhere else. But the cord's rapid spinning was deterring him from moving. Instead of further slowing down, it sped up again, and he couldn't understand. He called out to the manager to see where he was in conjunction to where he was standing. When he called out, the cord stopped, never coming to a slow, like something would if it had been moving rapidly. It was now just dangling there, completely still, as if it were never moving. The paramedic said he turned around and the property manager was standing there. He'd seen it too. Both of them searched the home thoroughly, thinking that someone must be there to make the cord spin that much and stop like that. But they could find no one. They met just outside the kitchen again, and the property manager said that he had to leave, that he needed to go home and make dinner. The paramedic said that he knew the man was pretty shaken up, and that likely he just didn't want to be there anymore. He wanted to get out of the property. He said they stood in the hallway for a moment, both looking at the cord, before swiftly leaving. Once both men were outside, they tried to rationalize why this cord would be spinning and what caused it to call through to my call center. It should have been, for sure, disconnected. The property manager told the paramedic that the next of kin maybe had the old device, and was it possible that they had accidentally called out? Over the phone, the paramedic had asked me this. I didn't want to scare him further, but it really depended on where these people lived. And according to him, that was over 100 miles away. But I know these devices have a range of around 300 meters. It would be impossible for the device to have caused the call-out. I asked if it was possible that it was a fan or a forced air heating system. But he told me that the manager and he had checked all the windows, and that though the power was still connected, there was no heating and no air system that was powered on at the time, and it hadn't been for several days. By the end of our call, he sounded genuinely concerned and said that in his 15 years of doing this job, he'd never once seen anything like that, something that he couldn't explain, but also that made him feel so uneasy. I thought, coming from a paramedic, this was quite a statement. There was a bit of silence, and I felt bad ending the conversation, so I stayed on the line. He was sort of rambling nervously, saying he felt like it was something out of a movie, something that just had to be special effects or someone pulling his leg, but it wasn't, because he'd seen it all play out right there in front of him. He stopped talking suddenly, and then he said that he felt uncomfortable. I didn't say anything, but he told me he was now sitting in his vehicle. I could tell that his breathing was speeding up, and he asked me to stay on the line with him, just until he got out of that place. That he didn't see anyone, but got a strange feeling that something was watching him. I found that my own pulse started to race a bit when he said this, but I agreed to stay on the line, of course. Eventually, he seemed to calm down a bit, even apologizing unnecessarily for keeping me on the line. I told him no worries, and I tried to reassure him that this sounded like a once-in-a-lifetime thing, to not worry about it too much, and I thanked him for responding to the call. After we got off the phone, I just sat for an extended amount of time. By the end of it all, I found that I could explain the alarm call. It had happened before, not in the exact same way, but it seemed possible. But I couldn't explain what they had seen. I couldn't explain the movement of the cord, and the two things together, combined with it being the residence of a deceased person, well, all of that just makes the whole thing that much more eerie. This happened last winter, just before New Year's. I was checking the mail, which is just across the street from my house and the other houses themselves. It's one of those big block ones that has multiple lockboxes inside. I was trying to make it quick, since it was freezing. And as I was making my way back across the street to my house, I saw something in my neighbor's yard. Initially, I'd assumed it was a holiday decoration that I hadn't noticed before. Looking down at my mail, I saw movement out of the corner of my eye, just as I hit my walkway. I stopped, and so did the movement. I switched my gaze back to my neighbor's yard, and whatever I thought was a decoration had moved. It was now on the side of the house, no more than 2 feet tall. There was something about this thing that really creeped me out. No matter how much I tried to focus on it, all I could make out was that it was dark and small. And it didn't appear to be furry. It seemed skinny. But what type of animal was it? The darkness, the thing, started to move again. This time, while I looked at it, I wasn't sure what I was looking at. Now, seeing it in motion, it didn't move like an animal at all. It moved on 2 legs, quickly, and it had small but proportionate arms, and a proportionate head with ears. Still, I couldn't make out any details on the face itself. I was shocked at what I was seeing, that I was seeing arms. It was moving in the direction of my neighbor's backyard, and as it crossed over, the security light on the side came on. It illuminated the space, and long enough for me to catch this thing running, then diving into the bushes and over my neighbor's fence, out of view. It honestly looked like a small human. I don't understand it. I felt too strange asking my neighbors if they had cameras hooked up, so I ended up letting it go, chalking it up to one of the strangest, unexplained events I've personally experienced. I find myself doing a double take almost every time I check the mail. I have yet to see it again, and given that I have no clue what it is, that's probably for the best. Recently, my wife and I purchased some farmland in eastern Washington. The intent last year when we bought it was to set up an official growing station for cannabis. I almost hesitate stating the business only because I don't want it to take away from the experience. So to get it out of the way, no, I was not high. I just grow cannabis. I don't smoke it. Anyways, as of today, we still own the farm, the land. And though we've started to set up the grow house, we haven't finished it. Because, to be quite frank, shit has gotten really weird. I've got a series of events, so I guess going in order of when they occurred makes the most sense. This takes us back to the first week of renovations. We didn't remove anything from the farm, per se. Instead, we kept the large barn that they'd had on site, and we just began to upgrade it. A lot of this early work was maintenance, cleaning, painting. We'd brought our kids with us the first several weeks, as they loved doing that kind of work, and they loved being able to play with our dog at the farm while they could. Our home didn't have much of a yard, so it was nice. On this day, I was doing some yard work and decided to head into the trailer that we'd set up so I could get something to drink. Only my 7-year-old daughter was in the yard with the dog. My wife was in the trailer, and my son was napping. I'm over the small sink drinking water, and I noticed that the garden hoe that I'd set up against the tree, it wasn't up there anymore. I looked at my wife and asked if anyone else was working here today. She told me that as far as she knew, it was just us. I walked outside and headed towards the tree. As I got closer, I could see that the garden hoe was in the tree. I saw the handle hanging down. I didn't even believe what I was seeing at first, so I kept looking around for the garden hoe, and then back up at the tree. It was definitely in there. I looked over, scanning the yard. My daughter wasn't far away. She was sitting in the grass, playing with some toys. As I looked at her, she waved her doll at me. I smiled and waved back. I knew that she couldn't have gotten that up into the tree. I scanned the rest of the property. No other cars. I didn't see a single person. We'd met the neighbors, a nice old couple, and though they weren't terribly far away, I didn't think that they would do something like this, go out of their way. It didn't seem like something anyone would do. My gaze eventually hits the barn, and then back to the tree, where the garden hoe is now resting against it. It's where I left it minutes ago, but not where I'd seen it moments ago. Nothing hanging from the tree anymore. I was silently losing it, thinking maybe I was actually losing it. I walked the property for a good 25 minutes, but nothing else strange happened, and I didn't see anyone. So I moved on. Before leaving, I told my wife about what I'd seen, but without seeing it for herself, I understood that it was even harder to wrap your head around. But on the way home, my daughter brought it up. As she put it, she saw me set the garden hoe against the tree. She saw that it was gone before I came back out, but never saw it move. And then it just appeared against the tree again, while I stood there. My wife grabbed my leg and was looking at me. I was driving, but I knew she was as weirded out by this whole thing as I was. After that day, she decided to keep the kids at home with her, at least until we got some construction done. They had known at the beginning of this adventure that the farm wasn't really theirs and that they wouldn't always be allowed to run free there. So we used that as our excuse as to why they had to stay home. Several weeks after this event, We had a lot of contractors coming out to the area, since we were getting ready to do some of the larger projects like restoring power to the barn and plumbing. When we had the electrician come out, he told us that in addition to needing to replace the wiring, he thought we may want to consider a whole separate covered building or shed for the electrical panel, explaining that the wires looked fine here, but they certainly weren't working. Somehow they were destroyed, but without understanding the problem, he thought it was best to rewire in a different location. We were going to be setting up a generator, so we decided we would just incorporate the panel to that area and build a shed around it. On the second day of the rewiring project, we get the generator delivered and things are looking good for us. Until the original electrician tells me that he's not comfortable replacing these wires, that the power source should be completely and entirely dead, but he just felt a shock that could have maybe killed him had he not been wearing his gloves and standing on 2 wood panels. I was confused since the power was completely shut down, and we'd spent the last 2 weeks establishing that these wires for sure didn't work. So, in the moment, I thought this guy maybe was trying to pull a fast one on me, first saying I needed full rewiring and now claiming that he almost got electrocuted on my property. But he was more apologetic than someone who was trying to con me. He said he didn't expect me to pay for the services thus far, since he hadn't actually diagnosed the problem and he hadn't actually rewired anything. I wasn't sure what to make of all this, but I paid him for his initial consult and went with a company he recommended. So, for the next week, we halted work, but the barn officially had power for whatever reason. I wasn't comfortable with anyone besides an electrician working out there, so we had the power shut off, and we didn't visit the farm for a few days until another could come out. On one of those days, or nights rather, a call from the neighbors near the farm comes in, saying that they've called the fire department because there appears to be a fire on our property. They were asking if it was all right for them to head over there, and I told them please because we were 25 minutes away, and I asked if they'd also call the police. Upon arrival, I was so relieved to see that it's not the actual barn that's on fire, or the trailer. But I am shocked to see that the new shed that we'd started building off to the side of the barn was completely destroyed. All I could think was, thank God the generator wasn't in there. And then I was just pissed. It didn't cross my mind that this was anything except the actions of another person. The police asked if I had security cameras, which I explained the whole saga of the last few weeks, which included that I didn't have power, that it was shut off now. They said there were no signs of arson, but couldn't find a natural source either. They ruled it unknown, leaning on the side of natural causes because there was dry brush near the area. It just didn't sit right with me. Didn't feel natural. I remember I was upset with the lack of information and ruling it natural causes, and I was frustrated walking back to my truck, saying under my breath, "This place is a fucking nightmare." And I heard just behind me, "You don't like it here?" It startled me, so I turned around to say, "Excuse me," expecting to see a woman to match the voice I'd just heard. But there was no one standing there. I saw only the police in the distance, my neighbors. I definitely heard a voice. I looked at my phone. I wasn't calling anyone. So what was it? Who was it? I was way too freaked out to leave right away. Maybe I should have, but I was so nervous about what I'd heard. And to distance myself from it before driving home, I walked over to the neighbors and got their version of events, what they had seen, not seen. I got confirmation that no cars came in or out of the property, Their property sits at the end of the dead road that the entrance of our farm is on. And the cameras, they face down that road. They showed nothing. I asked if they showed this to the police, and they had. I figured I ought to let them head home, so I thanked them, and I got into my truck before I was the last one out of there. I couldn't shake the question that I'd gotten, or response. I was starting to think that, yeah, I didn't like it here. So about 2 months after the last event, we're in August of this year, my wife and I end up picking up an already built shed from Home Depot, and we get the generator set up. The wiring's been replaced, which took the longest. I won't get into all the details, but basically we went through several companies before one of them just worked out. I'm not by any means an electrician, so I can't say that that was normal or if it was related to the other weird shit that was happening. I was just happy that the power was working. Other strange things would continue happening. They just weren't as well documented in my mind. Like, I couldn't really definitively say that I hadn't been mistaken. Tools that would go missing and end up in different areas. Sometimes I would find things in places by mistake, like climbing to the top of the barn, only to see that several gardening tools had been set up there. Even though my wife and I didn't recall doing any of that stuff, we had workers coming in and out during this time. And so maybe it was one of them, we would think. Well, we got the camera set up with the power now working, and that made us feel good for a while, until we moved on to plumbing. I was at Home Depot getting various supplies, mainly for the actual grow setup itself, and more treated wood for the outside deck I was starting to add. I received a call from the plumbing crew, asking if I wouldn't mind coming to check something out. I was sort of in the middle of literally buying everything, so I asked if it could wait a little bit, but they were rather cryptic on the phone, just saying that they thought I should see something before they continued. So I rushed to the farm, making about a 15-minute drive, a 10-minute drive, and I met the plumbers at the main entrance of the barn. They took me around to the side where they'd been digging. At first, I just saw a large, deep hole, and I wasn't sure why this would warrant me needing to come out here. But they asked me to look closer, asked me what I saw. I hadn't initially seen anything, so I looked closer, and then I saw it. I saw multiple its. Bones. Multiple bones. One of the guys pointed to the wall of the hole. I had to move where I was standing to see what he was pointing at. But it was a very long bone. It closely resembled one that you'd see maybe on a human leg. I had only seen skeletons the way I think most people have, in a classroom or something. Though this looked much dirtier than those, there wasn't much else this thing looked like it could be. The guy who had pointed at it said that he didn't know what it was at first, so he tried to pull it out, at which time it revealed it was much larger than he anticipated. This was all new territory for me, but something about continuing the work seemed very wrong. So I asked the guys to head out and decided to call the local sheriff. By this time, I was sure he was tired of our property. It hadn't even occurred to me to be nervous about human remains possibly being found on my property. As it turns out, calling them and stopping work was exactly what I was supposed to do. Probably helped me not look so guilty. After hours of questioning and a lot of people and caution tape, the sheriffs assured me that the bones were rather old, likely here before the barn itself was even built. Naturally, I wanted to know what was next for us. And the officers told me that they were going to take samples back to a lab, have them analyzed. But in the meantime, I was told to cover the area, discontinue work, and wait to hear regarding next steps. That was almost 4 months ago. We've been given the runaround a couple of times, and after so much time has passed, we've considered cutting our losses and selling the property. At this point, we're both too afraid to go there, and we can't continue working on the place, so it's really just a creepy piece of property on our hands now. And what are we waiting for? I mean, honestly, I don't know that we want to know the conclusion of whatever investigation it is they have going on. When I was 5 years old, I was lost briefly in the woods. Please know that I know a lot of people have stories like mine. I'm not alone, but I'm also lucky. I know there's stories like mine where it's not just briefly that they're lost, the ones where they remain missing, and it's the stories that their loved ones tell. Now, this was many, many years ago. And my parents are both deceased now, but while alive, they would often tell me this story, including what I told them that day when I was eventually found. There's not much I can remember outside of what I'm about to explain. I was running. I was laughing. Surrounded by trees. I was looking at my feet as I ran. And at some point, I saw my feet quickly dash through water, or what seemed like water. It was clear and wavy. I stopped running right away, and I was dry. I turned around to see what it was, and I could see now a wall in front of me, a wall of the same wavy water that I'd just ran through. It didn't appear to be flowing like water, though. Just a blanket that made the forest on the other side seem blurry. I didn't see any family, and I couldn't see anyone familiar. I could hear something in the distance. It was my name being called. I thought I should go back the way I came, through the water wall. But I found myself being pulled in the other direction. I felt like someone was physically lifting me, but my feet remained anchored to the ground. My name continued to be called, and I remember calling out as soon as I realized I couldn't move. No one was near me, though. I could see no one. Instead of trying to call out again, I tried to move, and after some effort, I was closer to the wall. And now I could see figures on the other side, blurry figures that resembled people in colorful clothing. And the voices had to be coming from them, and they had to be my family. Then, it's blank. The rest of it filled in by family. The first detail I have trouble coping with is the amount of time that I was apparently gone. I understand a 5-year-old has no concept of time, really, but I was the kid who needed their parents, never away from them for more than a few minutes. So when they told me that I was gone for over an hour, I couldn't believe it. And when they found me, I was just laying in the woods. It looked like I'd passed out, but I had no injuries to my head or anywhere else. My parents, my whole family, and local police, they had all looked in the place that I'd ended up being found. Because of this, my family was under extreme scrutiny by the police. They were under the assumption that one of my family members had harmed me or tried to take me. and had gotten afraid when the police showed up. But as the police continued to question them, it was clear that they were all accounted for. And it was clear that no one who was part of the search was capable of putting me where they found me, not without someone else seeing it too. The whole event was probably far more tragic for everyone else involved, but it does leave me with an unsettling feeling. I'm not claiming to understand what happened to me in the woods, but I know in my heart that I wasn't harmed by any person. I also know that regardless if someone misplaced me, I still remember the water-like wall, my parents and others calling out to me. I still remembered everything up until it went blank. I couldn't help but feel like I was in the same space as everyone, but slightly behind it too. I think another realm goes a little far into the imagination, but it's hard to give an explanation in layman's terms when I don't know of anything like it that exists, simple or complex. When I was about 8 years old, I saw a man get shot in the parking lot across the street from my house. If you travel down Highway 99 through Shoreline, you'll see now just a large parking lot, but it used to be a small strip club named Sugar's. Behind Sugar's is a street called Whitman Avenue. The gravel driveway of our house faced the street of Whitman. Directly across the street was the parking lot of Sugar's. You would think that having a strip club as your neighbor would be terrible, but it was never loud. The clientele aren't really ones who like to draw attention to themselves, and security was always in and out, smoking, reducing the creeps and loiterers who might want to wait outside for one of the women that worked at the establishment. It was fall and getting darker earlier, and although I would never leave the confines of my front yard, I used to play outside until it was my bedtime. My mom was a single mother and she had 2 jobs. Although that was enough to purchase a house in the 90s, it also meant that I was putting myself to bed at night. From her work phone in Linwood, she would call me and talk to me about my day, wishing me sweet dreams. One night, before the house phone rang with my mom's nightly call, I was playing with my action figures in the yard when the bliss of my imagination was interrupted by the crash of Sugar's back metal door being kicked open. I watched 2 bouncers emerge from the black doorway, holding some guy who clearly fucked up somewhere along his night. This man is literally tossed by his jacket into the concrete, and I hear the bouncers cuss at him, telling him to leave before they call the cops. I vividly remember that this is when I learned the word perv. After this whole incident, I asked my mom what that meant, forcing her to uncomfortably explain the definition while making breakfast the next day. Now hiding behind our shrubs, I continue to watch the spectacle taking place across the street. The man gets up and one of the bouncers immediately puts him back down with a punch. I've never seen someone get punched like that in real life, and the thud makes my stomach turn. He gets up, but this time, instead of going after security, he stumbles over to a car, and I see him open the trunk and grab something. Knowing what he's probably going to retrieve from there, I start to gather my toys to go inside. But before I could run, I hear pop, pop, pop. And the dark parking lot is briefly lit up by 3 brilliant white flashes. When I look up again, the man is slumped over on the hood of his car. One of the bouncers also had a gun, and also probably knew what this guy was going to get from his trunk. Within the hour, the scene is blocked off by police and the body is taken away by an ambulance. When my mom calls that night, I tell her everything. I'm pretty shaken up, but there's nothing that she can do. She works until 4. Her voice sounds like she's trying to hold back tears as she wishes me sweet dreams that night. With only movies as my reference, I didn't really have a concept of what I'd witnessed. Not really. I think that my mom was also not trying to scare me by downplaying the events. Later in that week, while outside, I'd see that man again, in the parking lot. He just stood there for hours. When the bouncers would come out to smoke, they just ignored him. He wasn't being confrontational, so that's why I thought that they were just looking past him. That evening, I sat in the kitchen while retelling my mom the events from school that day. My story led up to me mentioning that I'd seen that man, the one from the other day. At first, she didn't know who I was talking about. I say, the guy who lost the gunfight the other day. There was a pause on the receiver, and then I hear her say, "What?" I can again hear that her voice has an odd, nervous inflection. Trying to ease her worry, I tell her, "Don't worry. He's not causing any trouble. He's just standing there." "Is he still standing there?" she asked with the same tone. I say yes. I can see him through the kitchen window, and I could. My mother's voice no longer held composure when she demanded I lock the doors, shut the blinds, and stay away from the window. And now, as an adult, I knew why the man never came back. Not really. And why my mom's voice sounded like that when I said he did. But the significance of everything was only recently unrepressed, sparked by a drive through Shoreline on Highway 99. Passing by where Sugars used to be, now just a parking lot, but I saw my old house. Over the years, a lot's been done or not done with it, depending how you look at it. But I'm still captured in a web of nostalgia, and eventually, an otherwise forgotten memory reaches my thoughts, and I think of the guy who stood in that parking lot all night, just staring at the men who had literally shot him down. Wow. Holy shit. Okay. I found myself saying this out loud, just putting it together in this moment of recalling the past. Nope. I put my foot on the gas a little more graciously as I departed, thinking at the time that some nostalgic memories need not to be unpacked. I live in a town called Woodstock. It's located in northern Illinois. It's more of a town than a city, in my opinion, because it has that historical feel, and the population is much less than, say, Chicago, where I grew up. Relatively close to my house is a large park called Emmerickson Park, and I go there often. I'm familiar with the types of wildlife that I'll encounter, as well as the types of people. There aren't a lot of large animals in the area, not wild anyways. Maybe some domesticated goats and cows, but that's as big as you'll see around here. When it comes to people, it's typically older folks like myself that are out fairly early. And every now and then, you'll see some families. There's a specific nature reserve spot that I always make my way to. It's a bit deeper into the trail and slightly off the beaten path. I wouldn't say that I'm the only one that uses it, but I will say that I don't typically see people when I take that way. This happened over the summer, in July. Many things remained closed at the time, so the normal buzz of the town had been off all summer, all year really. But nature didn't really go anywhere, so I spent every day at Emerickson. It was around 7 a.m., and I'd watched the sunrise at the park entrance. I made my way to the makeshift path and headed towards the reserve. I was surprised when I made my way up the hill to see someone large standing with their back to me. But when I stopped, I realized that this wasn't a person. It was something, but covered in all black, not moving, standing there. The only thing my mind could accept was that it was a statue, the shape, the stillness, but a statue seemed almost more unlikely than anything else. I had been here practically every day for the last few months, including the day prior. There was no statue. And what a feat that would have been, to carry it all the way over here. During all of this, I'm not moving. I'm simply thinking about what I should do. It was becoming obvious that whatever I was seeing, I was looking at its back, and with the sun poking through the openings of the top of the trees, I could see that this thing appeared to have feathered or scaled skin. A large standing bird, but again, I know the types of birds here. And anywhere, really. They aren't over 5 or 6 feet tall. And the legs, they appeared so human-like, outside of the fact that they were completely black, and seemed to share the same scaly appearance that their back did. I noticed a vibration. Putting my hands in front of me, I could see that they weren't shaking, so this thing was moving. I tried to focus, and I saw it vibrate in place. The gargoyle-esque being then opened its wings. Now I could see that it was wings, and legs, and arms. Just as soon as I'd seen this, it was gone. It didn't just disappear, though. It more launched off, straight into the air. I'll admit it. I was too afraid to run out into the clearing to get a better look in the sky. I had been sure that this thing was well over my height, and a force, a real force, one that I had no business trying to stand up against. Curious if anyone else has seen something like this before. My description is pretty much all I have, but I think that if you've seen it, then the description is all you need. And so we've reached the end of The Darkest Hour. But I hope you enjoyed the last hour of this Friday, the 13th. And be sure to join me every Friday at 11 p.m. right here on neoretrofm.com. Do you have stories like these? I'd love to share them. Send them to me, amandadarkesthour@gmail.com, or on Reddit, Amanda Jane FMN. Stay spooky.